Hello everyone, Mr. Slampta here, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about section 8.2. So this is video number 2 of 3, and I'm going to want to talk to you about a little bit more complicated problems that involve arithmetic sequences. So now before we get started on this, I want to remind you about what our rule was. So our formula or our rule for arithmetic sequences is right here. an is equal to a1, which is the first term, plus n minus 1 times d, which is the common or constant difference. We're going to use this formula a lot, and so I just wanted to make sure that you were clear on what we were talking about when we were doing it. So now here's the thing that's going to happen. In the last couple of problems that you've seen, what you have noticed is that I've given you actually quite a bit of information. So here are the two that are at the top of the page right here. And what you'll notice is that I've given you a whole list, and that list is great because it's going to tell you what your first term is, and you're going to be able to use the list to find out what the common difference is pretty quickly. But now what I want to do is I want to get into some problems where I'm going to start pulling back a little bit and giving you less and less information, but still expecting you to produce a very good, high-quality rule for me. So this is me giving you less, but you doing more work. So that makes it an even better Algebra 2 type question. So let's take a look right here. It says write a rule for the nth term of the arithmetic sequence. And what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to give you a difference value, and I'm going to give you a 4. So that's a little bit frustrating for some people. The difference part is great. Knowing that the difference is 4 is going to be wonderful because that is going to be part of our final answer or our final rule. But giving me a 4 is not so wonderful because what I really want is a1. And no, you can't just simply cheat and plug the 16 in, a4 in the a1 spot. You do actually have to find out what a1 is. So this is not as bad as it might seem. It is easy to get a1, and I have a couple of ways you can do that. So here's my first choice and the one that I think is best. What you can do right here is you can solve this formula for a1. And the way that I would do that is I would take every single number that was given to me and I would plug them into the formula. So let me show you how I would do that. Let's start here with an. We usually leave an alone, but this time we're going to replace it with this 16 right here. 16 is going to serve as kind of like our answer. Then a1 is something we usually know, but this time we do not, so we will leave it alone. Now let's go back to that 16 for a second. The 16 was listed as the fourth term, and so that 4 is going to be an n right here. And we'll always use our minus 1. Now lastly, the difference. As I had stated earlier, they did give us the difference. Now this difference also happens to be 4. It is a little bit of a different 4 than the 4 we'd already written down, but they are both the same number. Now let's talk about solving. So to solve this, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to just see if we can simplify first because we have a lot of numbers that are clustered together. And so I'm doing my subtraction in my parentheses and I'm going to do my multiplication. This is all very quick and easy and it goes pretty smoothly, especially since you've been solving since you were in middle school. My last little move right here is going to be to bring the 12 to the other side, and I'm going to simply subtract 12 from both sides in order to do that. 16 take away 12 is going to be easy to take care of, and we're going to get another 4. So you can find out that a1 is going to be 4 as well. I think that that's super easy, and if you're doing it on your own without having your math teacher talking to you the whole time, it'll happen even quicker for you. Now, if you didn't like that technique, or if you just want some variety, here's another one. What I do sometimes is what I'll do is I'll build a list that is incomplete. So what I have right here is I have my fourth term, and I have my third and my second and my first as well. Now I don't know what these terms are, so I've left them blank, but I can find them very quickly using my difference. Now differences usually work this way. What you would usually do is you would bounce your way down from one term to the next by adding a difference. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go the other way. So we're going to be bouncing our way up. Now the difference value that you're going to use is still the same. It's still the difference value of 4, but because we're going up our list instead of down our list, instead of adding it each time, we are going to be subtracting our difference. Remember in the first video when we had worked from right to left and we had subtracted? This is the same thing, except instead of working from right to left, we're working from bottom to top. So this is definitely some work you might want to do with your calculator, but if you simply subtract 4 a couple of times, what you'll do is you'll work your way back to the exact same first term that we got as well. And maybe you just like that way better. I'm not quite sure, but I wanted to provide you with two options. Now that we have a first term and a difference, we should be able to write out our rule. Everything was 4s, remember? So that means that our first term is a 4. We'll leave our n minus 1 the same, and our difference is also 4. So there's your rule. Let's do an even more complicated one. So now our most complicated one is this guy right here. And what I want you to notice is that once again I'm pulling further back and giving you less helpful information. What I've given to you right here is I've given you the 5th term, which is 15, and I've given you the 8th term, which is 30. Now neither of these pieces are parts that I actually need for my rule. Remember that my rule requires a difference value and a first term, and so I did not get anything of value here. Now, you have to find two things, but even though you have to find two things, it will be much better if you find the difference first and then the first term, and so we will look for our difference first. Once you have the difference, then the problem will be a lot like this one, and this one it should feel pretty easy for you. So let's get that difference. Now, for getting the difference, there's a bunch of different ways you can do that, and if you search for arithmetic sequences on YouTube, you'll find other strategies. But the strategy that I think is the best is going to be the incomplete list strategy. So what I have right here is I have my list of terms, but I don't know a lot of them. So I have my 5th term plugged in, and I have my 8th term. This is the same information that I got right here, but you can see it more spaced out now, so you can understand the distance between the two facts. Now, just like we were saying earlier, when you are trying to get from one term to the next, the thing that you need to do is you need to use a difference or a common difference in order to make that happen. What I'd like to think about is, I'd like to think about being at the 5th term, 15, and bouncing my way down to the 8th term, 30. And I'd like to think about adding the same difference each time as we move our way down the list. If you're going to be doing this, how many differences do you need to add? And when you draw out the list, you can see it. I need to add 1, 2, 3 differences. So let's talk about that and write our formula down at the same time. If I start with 15 and I add 3 differences to it, I will end up at 30. As I say it and write it down, I'm building the formula that I can now solve. Let's make it a little bit better, though. Something that I've done right here is I've written plus D plus D plus D to represent my 3 jumps that I had in my incomplete list. I'd like to write that a little bit more simply, so I will. D plus D plus D, that is 3 Ds in a row, so that is 15 plus 3D equals 30. That's a better equation and easier to solve. So now let's solve it. I'm going to move my 15 over to the right side by subtracting it. I'm using opposite or inverse operations. And then after that, I am going to get 3D is equal to 15. And now I need to get rid of the 3, and I'll get rid of that by dividing it. Now all of a sudden I have a difference value, and my difference value is 5. Now, some of you, once again, just like in the first video, you might have actually even just spotted it. Seeing it in the list right here and seeing the blanks, you might have been able to kind of fill these in with your brain pretty quickly and known that the difference was 5. But others, like myself, don't see it. And so if you don't see it, then you might need a tool. Or, even if you do see it, it might just be because this is a pretty straightforward and simple problem with a small gap between the two numbers. And so if the problems get a little bit more complicated, you might want to use my strategy. Okay, now that you have your difference, you're going to want to find the first term. And you can go back to using the same 2 techniques that we had used right here. So if you really like your incomplete list that you've built, just fill it in. Now you need to work your way up the list. So every time you use your difference, you're not going to be adding it, but rather you're going to be subtracting your difference. And so that will be something that you're going to want to do next. So if you're at the 5th term and you subtract 4 differences, you'll get up to the first term. The other way that you can do this is once again using the formula. And that's my preferred technique. And that's probably because I'm old school. And so what I would do if I was going to use my formula is I would pick my favorite of the 2 terms that were given to me, which in my case is usually the smaller of the 2, the 15, and I would plug that into the formula like I did over here. So I'd start with the 15, and that would be equal to my first term, which I don't know, and then I would have my plus sign. And rather than writing n minus 1 like I usually do, I would focus on the fact that the 15 is actually the 5th term. And then at the end there, now that I have my difference, I could use it in my formula. When you solve this, or whether you jump your way up the list, you're going to end up with the same answer each time. A1 is going to be -5. So our rule is going to use this first term and this difference value, and it's going to be negative 5 plus n minus 1 times 5. There is a you try it problem that is down here at the bottom of the page. Please pause the video and give that problem a try now. Here's the answer to your you try it problem. This one's a little simpler because I did give you the difference, so you could take advantage of that. I did not use an incomplete list, but rather use my formula because it's my preferred technique. You're welcome to use any formula you would like. Then I wrote out my formula right here, or my rule right here, using my new first term and my difference. Now this question does have a second part to it where it asks for the 22nd term, so then I had to use my formula to find the 22nd term. This is the second of 3 videos on section 8.2 that I will be putting up. The third video will stop talking about sequences and start talking about series.